Hi everyone, good night, good evening, and welcome to Career Success After Hearing Loss with Dr. David Baldridge. Before we get started, I would first like to thank Mike of Alternative Communication Services for providing CART this evening. Thanks so much, Mike. Dr. Baldridge is a Newcomb Fellow and Associate Professor of Management at Oregon State University and a Research Associate with the National Technical Institute for the Deaf and TID, which is at the Rochester Institute in New York. So thank you very much, Dr. Baldridge, for joining us this evening. This is a hot topic, as you know. And I know that there's going to be a lot of good discussion following your presentation. Just a little bit of information too before we get started, and that is that Dr. Baldridge is going to ask questions throughout his presentation. And in order to answer the questions, which will be a multiple choice type question, if you look at the left-hand part of your screen in the middle, under the participants list, you will see 4 little icons. On the far left is a little smiley face, and on the far right you will see a lowercase a. If you hover your mouse over that, you'll see A, B, C, and D. So when it gets to that point of the slide, you will just click your answer there so that Dr. Baldridge will know how many people answered for each question. Hope that makes sense. We have a little picture of that on the slide, so you should be able to see it there as well. I'm not going to waste any more time talking since you have great information to present. The mic is all yours.
All right, thank you so much, Nancy, and welcome everyone. I really appreciate you being here with me tonight. I am in Oregon, so it's only 5 o'clock here. I know it's much later for many of you joining in. And this is such an important topic. As Nancy mentioned, I'm a professor and a researcher, so I approach this topic as a researcher. But like many of you, I'm also hearing impaired, and for me, I've been hearing impaired since early childhood. And currently, I would describe myself as deafened, but also a cochlear implant user, so I have bilateral cochlear implants. So in the course of my life, I've experienced the full range of hearing and hearing loss, and I would call being a professor my third career, so to speak. And I've worked in many different states and many different contexts. So tonight I want to share, my experiences as a person with hearing loss, as well as someone who has conducted a lot of research in this area. And so I've had the opportunity to learn from hundreds and hundreds of people that have hearing loss and have experienced both success and frustrations in the workplace. And the topic, I think, is very important personally for each of us because work is such an important part of our livelihood and our integration into society. But it's also a social issue, and that's how I explain it to people that don't have hearing loss, how common hearing loss is and how it's becoming more common by age group. But also, as we expect people or encourage people to work later in life, we'll expect a disproportionate increase because as people work past 60, 65, 70, the probability of them having hearing loss goes up exponentially. So it's a really big issue, and it's something that individuals like us need to know how to manage effectively, and also organizational leaders and owners. And that's often a target for my research because I work in a business school. So I'm trying to educate tomorrow's business owners, managers, leaders, and coworkers. So that's our topic for tonight. I'll show you our agenda next. So for our agenda, I want to start by talking about the career success research in the general population, so not people with hearing loss, but just a full spectrum of the population, because there's a lot of really good research there. And while hearing loss impacts our careers, we're just like anyone else in many ways. So we'll start with the general research on career success, or the predictors of career success, and then we'll talk about hearing loss and how it impacts our careers. And then I'll try to end with some more practical strategies and tactics for managing hearing loss. And number 4, not shown in here, is we'll reserve the last 15 to 20 minutes for kind of open question and answers. So that's our agenda for tonight. All right, our first interactive poll, and this is what Nancy was talking about. I tried to take a photo of this screen so that you can see, where you enter your response. But I'd like to know a little bit about our audience tonight. So how many of you are currently working as looking for work, retired, and those who are not working but also not currently looking for work. So if you can take a second and respond, we'll see the totals come up here. I'm just going to pause for a second. They're still rolling in. Okay, so it's settled down, so hopefully most people have had a chance to vote at this point. But it looks like 7 people are currently employed, 4 are looking, so those are our biggest groups, 3 are retired, and then 1 falls into category C. So thank you for that. All right, I'm going to cover a lot of ground tonight and focus primarily on those who are currently working, but also a little bit about those who are looking for work. And you can help direct the conversation as part of the Q&A as well. But I want to refer you to 2 articles I published back in 2014 that discuss a lot of these topics in more depth. And I'm also currently working on a follow-up article which will be similar but updated for my latest research. So you can look for that probably sometime this year. And I am hoping to present in Salt Lake City, and hopefully some of you will join me there as also for a continued discussion. But these are articles you can look back to later for a little more information. All right, so I want to set into the research on career success in the general population. So this is for people without hearing loss. But the first question, well, the majority are without hearing loss, so a mixture. But in the general population, people overall, one question is, what do people think of when they think of career success? So they're successful if what? And the 3 most common answers, or 3 dimensions of career success that most people agree to, are pay, so more pay, more success, promotions and status, so the rate of promotions or the level that you reach in an organization, or perhaps certain occupations are considered more prestigious, so to speak. So that's a second dimension of career success. And then finally, satisfaction with your career. So just how you feel about your career, how satisfied you are. So most studies look at one of those 3 or all 3 of those indicators of career success. So that's the general population. For people with hearing loss, I want to start by pointing out that they're interested in the same 3 things. So pay, promotions, status as part of promotions, and satisfaction. So those issues still matter, But when you talk to people that have experienced hearing loss about what career success means, there are some other important issues as well. So for a lot of people, it's being able to hang on to their current job after they experience hearing loss or as their hearing becomes worse, so to speak. For other people, it's finding a job, so they're not so worried about pay and promotions anymore, but they want to find a job. And within that job fit really matters, and two ways. So if it's more difficult to find work, then finding work where you can express your talents, so use your skills, your knowledge, your education, your experience, becomes harder to find and becomes more part of our definition of career success. And at the same time, finding work where our hearing loss is not as big of a daily frustration or doesn't impact our work negatively. So fit between our experiences and talents and our hearing becomes part of our definition of career success. And people with hearing loss also talk about the importance of having a supervisor or a boss or coworkers who understand hearing loss, where it's not a big deal for them. They're able to kind of accommodate the communication needs and respect employees that have hearing loss. So I simplified it here as bosses and coworkers who understand hearing loss. And related to that, but a little bit different, would be feeling included in the organization. So that can be particularly challenging for people with hearing loss who generally feel included in things on a day-to-day basis. So those are other indicators of career success that are important for people that experience hearing loss. Okay, now we're back to the general population, so meaning these are predictors of salary, promotions, and satisfaction in the overall workforce. In this particular study by Thomas et al., published in 2005 in the Journal of Applied Psychology, it's a meta-analysis, which is a study of studies, so to speak, or a statistical aggregation of a lot of different published studies. So any study that's published in an academic journal goes through a lot of scrutiny, so you can put confidence in the integrity of the findings. But any one study, I think, needs to be replicated. And so in this case, the authors statistically aggregated roughly 100 studies. It depends on the dimension we're looking at. And those 100 studies have responses from thousands of individuals. So pulling all those together gives us a little more confidence in the results of the study. So here's what they found. So relative to salary, they found that the key predictors of salary are education, political skills, work experience, and cognitive ability or IQ. So those four were top predictors of salary. They're somewhat in order, but it's most important to think of all four of those as being very important. Other things are too, but those were the four that showed the highest overall correlation. In terms of promotions, the key predictors were training development, extroversion, which is a personality dimension, so drawing energy from being around other people. Those folks are more apt to be promoted to be supervisors and managers and so forth. And social capital is in contrast to human capital. Human capital is the skills and knowledge and abilities that you contain within yourself. Social capital is the value of the people that you know and the strength of the relationship with those different people. So social capital is an important predictor of promotions. And as you might expect, working more hours maybe frustratingly is associated with a faster promotion rate or higher levels of promotions. Then finally is career satisfaction. So one thing I'll point out is that the predictors of salary and the predictors of promotion are not nearly as strong as the predictors of satisfaction. So these predictors of satisfaction explain a lot more of the variance in career satisfaction than these predictors of promotions or these predictors of salary. So in other words, we can more easily predict career satisfaction, and it's also something that each of us has a lot more control over. So we can control our level of satisfaction to a greater extent than we can salary or promotions. And I can't prove it, but I think that is particularly true after hearing loss, but that's a little more speculation at this point. So predictors for satisfaction, the first one is also a personality dimension, and that's locus of control, the extent to which we believe that the things that happen in our life are within our control is considered an internal locus of control. And people with an internal locus of control are more apt to be satisfied with their careers. Next is supervisor supportiveness. So if we have a supervisor who is supportive, whether we have hearing loss or not, it is a top predictor of career satisfaction. And to say it the opposite way, having a bad relationship with a supervisor is a top predictor of people quitting or at least wanting to quit their jobs. So supervisor relationships are very important. And again, I can only speculate right now, but I think disproportionately important for people with hearing loss, or at least that's true of the people that I've had a chance to interview so far. Then career sponsorship would be the organization taking an interest in your career and your career development. So that's related to career satisfaction. And training development again, so both for promotions and also for satisfaction. And then proactivity or proactive behaviors. So this kind of goes with the notion of an internal locus of control. So if you take ownership for your own career satisfaction and you're proactive about it, you will be more satisfied with your career. So that meta-analysis creates kind of a backdrop or foundation for talking about the impact of hearing loss on career success. And now I want to shift gears and talk about a recent study. So this study, we collected data over the past year, we being Mutka, Kulkarni, and I. Mutka is in India, and the modern world, she and I have only met one time, but we've done a ton of really great work together. So we're in kind of gated correspondence. And she and I, I'll advance the slide so you can see more details about the study. She and I interviewed 50 people for at least an hour, and we also had email exchanges with these individuals before and after those interviews. And we picked people that we knew were successful or had a reputation for being successful in their careers after hearing loss, because we wanted to hear their stories. So this is not a random sample, but rather a study of people who have found career success after experiencing hearing loss. And we asked those people about their experiences in their careers, really both before and after their hearing loss. And I want to share some results of that study. Okay, so each of those stories was they were very different. So there were a lot of differences in the personalities and the types of jobs, so a whole range. But we were able to identify these 6 kind of steps in the process, so to speak, that people went through, not always in order, but this is kind of the general pattern that people followed. So the first step was really understanding, people understanding that they had a hearing loss and accepting that. And that seems very simple to people that haven't experienced hearing loss. But hearing loss so frequently unfolds unevenly and slowly over time, and it's different at different frequencies. So a lot of people don't know that they have a hearing loss, and I think most of us that do have a hearing loss have a tendency to underestimate the severity of our hearing loss. Because we only know what we hear, we don't know what other people are hearing. So the first step was people, accepting, realizing that they have a hearing loss, but that didn't always lead to a new identity. When it did, people were better able to pursue career success. So people began to see, that they were still a professional, but they were also a person with a hearing loss. That became part of their identity. And to say that differently, if you don't know you have a hearing loss, if you don't accept that you have a hearing loss, then you're more apt to engage in things like bluffing or avoiding contact with other people. So strategies that are not very productive in the workplace. But people who, accept their hearing loss, okay, maybe I don't like it, but this is how things are. I don't hear as well as I used to in a lot of cases, and that's part of my new identity. So I'm a person with hearing loss. So for me personally, I describe myself as a deafened cochlear implant user when I give the long form. So I try to say that. If I'm in a hurry, I just tell people, gosh, I'm hearing impaired. You need to speak a bit more slowly for me. And that relates to the idea of managing hearing loss. So people that found greater career success, they were very active in managing their hearing loss, and they continue to be so. They can continue to do so, meaning that they make sure that they have the best technology, be it a cochlear implant or a hearing aid or a BAHA. So they have these medical technologies that minimize the barrier in the workplace and maximize what they can hear. Maybe the newest thing would be the use of remote microphones. For me personally, it's a Roger that allows me to hear in noisy situations and such as conferences and social events where I really used to struggle. But it's important to continually stay on top of that, and that's why being an active member of HLAA is a great way to keep learning about those things, because the rate of technology and change is just overwhelming sometimes. And new networks. So relating those things, for a lot of people, there was a real aha moment when they finally met at least one other person, hopefully multiple people, who were also hearing impaired and had similar experiences to their own. Now, when I say this, those first 4 steps, it took me, maybe a minute or two to talk about them, but for a lot of the really successful people that we interviewed, those things unfolded over years, if not a decade or more. It's just a very difficult process to go through. And a lot of times, once people met that first person who had similar hearing or hearing loss, then that really accelerated everything else. And that's part of the forming new networks. So ideally maintaining our old professional networks, but also having a network of other people that have similar hearing loss, ideally also in the same field, but really any other people that have hearing loss are great help in terms of managing our careers. Then we noticed that there was also, this is a little more subtle, but a lot of people seem to change their definition of career success. So we definitely noted a shift in multiple participants from focusing on pay, from focusing on status, to focusing more on career satisfaction, and that satisfaction often shifted to being able to help other people. So we don't have a lot of details on that. That'd be an area for follow-up research, but it's possible that people, because they kind of struggled or went through some difficult times themselves, that became more important in their definition of success. And then we definitely saw a process of job and or career crafting. So job crafting can be as simple as, realizing that once you have hearing loss, being the person to cover the phones is maybe not, the best use of your time and resources anymore. It's hard for you to do, maybe easier for a hearing coworker to do. So if you can, and this is tricky because not everyone can in their job, but if you can negotiate your job duties so that a coworker covers the phone and you do something else that maybe you do better than that other person, that type of task swapping or changing what we work on or changing how we work on it. So perhaps replacing phone calls with using email. That's what I do a lot in my work. So where other people would pick up the phone, I'm more apt to use email. So I picked a good time to lose my hearing, I think. And then career crafting is a little bit different, where people actually shift their career a little bit. So for example, medical people, all different types, so doctors, nurses, physical therapists, a whole range of different types of medical professionals. But we heard a common theme that as they became hearing impaired themselves, they were better able to relate to their patients that had hearing loss. And so they made that more of their specialty. Sometimes they did it consciously. Sometimes their coworkers kind of did it for them. So they realized that their hearing impaired colleague could maybe better relate to the patient that had hearing loss. And sometimes it was really centered around hearing loss. Other times it was centered more on aging, which is a huge growth area. So we saw that in different professionals in different industries that were able to refocus their career and take their, quote, disability and really turn it into an advantage that they could use to better serve their customers and clients. So that's what I mean by career crafting. All right, so another audience poll here. I'm curious to know, of those different strategies, which one, or all the above, all of them, is most critical to you. So take a second now and you can enter your response. So A, accepting hearing loss. B, changed identities, or updating your identity to a person with hearing loss. C, managing your hearing loss. D, as I described, job or career crafting. And E, all the above. So I'm going to pause for a second as results roll in. And again, if you joined us late, the way you enter your response is look for this icon. You'll see a little letter instead of the check box, and you can pick your response. So it looks like most people have responded at this point. The most common choice, so really kind of scattered answers, but the most common choice is D so far, which is job and career crafting. So not too surprising, but that also indicates that we have maybe a more advanced audience with us today. And then of course E, all the above. And C, also managing a hearing loss is an important strategy. So an interesting study that came out recently, I won't remember the exact citation, but they basically found that people who use hearing aids, and this may not even be maximizing effectiveness, but it makes, if I remember right, like about a $30,000 a year difference in salary. So don't quote me on the exact figure, But basically, managing your hearing loss in terms of using just hearing aids can have a big impact on your salary. So thank you for responding. Okay, so what are common challenges that the people that we interviewed talked about? So the first group is not a big surprise, right? So hearing loss can make communication very difficult. In particular, work on the telephone, depending on the severity of the hearing loss and the nature of the phone work, can be anywhere from, fatiguing, tiring, to just downright impossible. Meetings, the same thing. So it depends on the size of the meeting. It depends on the acoustics for the room. It depends on the participants in the conversation. So are they people that we know? Is it about a topic that we're familiar with? Is the lighting in the room good? So I joke with people, and ask if I need captioning for a meeting. General rule, if it's a big meeting, then I just ask for captioning. But I really don't know until the meeting is over whether I need caption or not, right? Because it just depends so much. And then ongoing communication with supervisors and coworkers and customers can also be a really important challenge for people with hearing loss. So the last three are maybe a little less obvious. So impression management is really important in the workplace, and it's difficult in the sense that when I go out in the community and I'm not at work, I can explain my hearing loss and maybe not worry so much about how other people perceive me. But at work, it's kind of a mixed message sometimes, or it's perceived that way, that, yes, I have a hearing loss, and here's what you need to do for you and I to communicate effectively. But at the same time, I'm a competent professional, I'm good at what I do. And so that's a challenge for people, that impression management that, yes, I have a disability, but I'm also very able. Or at least it's sometimes hard for other people to understand how people with disabilities are not less able overall. In fact, someone like Stephen Hawkins is immensely able, right? But he's also very disabled. Then there's the issue of isolation, which we talked about before, and the hidden factor of stress and fatigue. So in fact, there's a study that found that most people are aware of the increased stress and fatigue before they understand that it's related to the fact that they don't hear as well as they used to. So these are common challenges that people face in the workplace. Quick poll. So I'm curious which of these are most challenging for you. So most challenging for you: A, phones; B, meetings; C, isolation; D, stress and fatigue; E, all the above. So if you quickly enter your response here, I'm curious to see how our group will fare. People, I think you figured it out, but you look in this area and you will see a letter and you can indicate your response there. All right, we'll wait one more minute. Okay, most common response is E, all the above, which I was somewhat anticipating. And then people who picked out different ones, so I'm happy, well, I'm not happy to see, but I'm glad that people are recognizing D, that stress and fatigue are a major factor in their work. And then, of course, meetings, captioning and microphones being a great tool for that challenging situation. So thank you for your responses. Okay, so from here I want to shift to kind of more pragmatic to-dos, so strategies and tactics for managing your hearing loss, and point out that at this point, I'm moving more from actual research results to kind of a combination of those results, but trying to make it very applicable for audience members that have hearing loss themselves. So with that warning, I will proceed. So when I mention strategies, I'm talking about less frequent but bigger picture changes that people make to manage their careers after hearing loss. So as we talk about job and or career crafting, is a really important strategy for managing hearing loss at work. Returning to school is very common. So returning to school to either increase your level of education, because as you face more discrimination in the workplace, arming yourself with more education is useful for standing out as you look for work. And it's also used sometimes to change directions in a career. So for example, this is not part of a study, but I spoke to someone once that taught English as a second language, and they just found it too hard to continue in that line of work. So they went back to school and picked up a new profession. So school was a way of changing professions. Also, a lot of people report that finding accommodation, finding a supportive supervisor is easy in the public domain, particularly not-for-profit organizations, than it is in the private for-profit domain. Some people start their own businesses. Other people, as I mentioned before, find a way to make their disability an asset. There's also definitely people that shift to a more technical focus, and that technical focus can be accounting, it can be proofreading and editing, it can be anything where ongoing all-day communication is not the main factor in your success, but there's more of a technical base you can rely on at least part of the time and work independently. And then autonomy, the extent to which you control what you do, when you do it, how you do it. So increased autonomy definitely helps people succeed in the workplace. Then in terms of tactics, these are things that we need to do or be ready to do every day, perhaps all day, every day. But we need to be educated ourselves, and we need to be patient educators of other people. So no matter how well-intended your coworkers are, they're going to forget sometimes about your hearing loss. They're going to turn away from you. They're going to have the light to your face instead of your back. So you need to be well-educated yourself, and then you need to be able to patiently educate other people on how they can communicate effectively with you. Then another day-to-day tactic is seeking help, but I'm a firm believer that in order to seek help, we need to give help first. So if we're always looking for ways that we can add value and help our coworkers, then when we need help, they're very eager to repay that debt and help us out. So helping and seeking help is another day-to-day tactic in the workplace. And this will make sense in light of our prior polling, but managing our energy, our stress, and our attitude. People used to talk about time management a lot, but I think energy management is even more important, particularly for people that have hearing loss. So we need to find ways to manage our energy, manage our stress, and that allows us to manage our attitude. And having a sense of humor seemed to go a long way among the people that we interviewed. So they all had very difficult stories to tell, challenges that they had faced, but they were able to look at their past situations and their current situations, and also find humor in their own experiences and the attitudes of other people. So having a sense of humor is something to arm yourself with. Okay, audience poll. I think this is our last one. If you quickly indicate which of these you do on a regular basis in your day-to-day work. Okay, great. So education is the clear winner in this case, not too surprising. But pay attention to these others as well. So that notion of giving help first and seeking help in managing your energy and stress. And of course, humor is always a great tool. Okay, current research study that I'm conducting with Richard Durmeyer at NTID, as well as Professor Yang at Portland State University. And for this study, some of you may have already participated. If you have, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. If you have not, please email me if I describe this and it doesn't seem familiar. Definitely email me. I'd love to have more participants. This one is only designed for people who are currently employed. And we're trying to gather very, very rigorous data so we can publish it in a top business journal. And again, with the aim of educating our future business owners, bosses, and coworkers. So we're collecting surveys from people who are DHH, deaf or hard of hearing, at one point in time, at a second point in time, and then we're collecting data from the supervisor as well. Some people are not comfortable with that, so we open that up a bit so that we can collect that same data either from a current supervisor, or it can be collected from a former supervisor or a mentor. It just needs to be a second data point from someone that knows you and your work and your hearing loss really well. So we're looking forward to getting more data. Please email me if you can, and publishing that study sometime in the next year or so. Okay, so last thing, very pragmatic how-to. If you're looking for more resources, I think the HLAA website, which is down here and pictured here, is a great starting point because they summarize a lot of different resources that can help you out. Also, get involved with people locally, your local HLAA chapter, because there's nothing like meeting other people locally that are experiencing the same challenges in terms of boosting your career. So that's the basic presentation, and with that, I will open it up to questions from the audience.
Great, very interesting. Thank you so much. I would just add about the employment toolkit. That is also a really good resource for employers as well. So that's something that you can share with your employer if needed, if you need some ammo.
Yeah, thank you, Nancy. And I find that a lot of employers, they really want to do the right thing, they just don't know. And sometimes they're hesitant to ask an employee that has hearing loss. They don't want to offend them. So having a site that they can turn to is really helpful. So thank you for pointing that out.
Carrie said, it sounds like you're talking mostly about people who have an established career and then have experienced sudden hearing loss or kind of aged into their hearing loss. Can you talk more about people who have had a significant hearing loss since childhood or before finishing school and have always had to deal with hearing loss at work?
Sure, yeah, I mean, that fits my own personal experience, and it's different in the sense that people that experience hearing loss early on have a definite advantage because they develop good coping mechanisms early on. They don't have to change their identity. So people that, I guess the opposite would be if you have someone who is 40 years old and they go from normal hearing to completely deaf overnight, and that happens, then it just totally disrupts their career. I'm actually working on finishing a study right now where we look specifically at people with childhood onset disabilities, all different types. And the hard part is that where those folks have a disadvantage is that people that don't have a disability early on, they're able to get their career underway and have a lot of momentum, so to speak, able to get their education without being impacted by their disability. So that's hard for people that have childhood onset. In that particular study, what we find is that family members play a disproportionately important role. So brothers and sisters and as well as parents in terms of helping people with childhood onset disabilities get underway. So I think for people that have a childhood onset hearing loss, it's important that they go through that same process of really understanding their hearing loss and how that's going to impact their work, because most people find that they get a lot more accommodation as they pursue their education than they get in the workplace, and that's unfortunate. Then the other things about the types of employers and types of work I think are all still applicable. Okay.
Sue's asked, I'm keeping up with technology in the workplace. I'm not quite sure what she's asking. She says, about how much does that run a person per year? I'm assuming that, Sue, you're talking about technology that you might use or accommodations that might be provided to you to do your job. Is that correct? Maybe you can type some more of your question. Not quite sure what she means.
Okay. Well, I will talk a little bit in general, and then if we get a clarification, that'd be great. But I guess one thing would be that most employers find that accommodations are not really that expensive. But I think that kind of masks the fact that accommodations are not always requested or provided, right? So certainly having sign language interpreters or captionists are relatively expensive. So a lot of people reserve those for big meetings or more critical meetings, because that can become expensive. Most employers are willing to negotiate job tasks, which is back to the job crafting, to find ways to kind of maximize the employee's contribution, minimize their stress. So I don't have any exact numbers. It varies a lot, but most people that I've surveyed so far, I would say their accommodation cost to their employer per month would be, for most people, it's under $100. For some people, it might be $1,000 or so, but that would not be the majority of people per month.
Okay, Lynn.
So did that answer the question?
Lynn asked, could you talk more about managing stress and energy?
Yeah. So I think the first thing, and I can describe it best for me personally, so this may relate to you, to other people in the room, so to speak, or not, but I know for me that I'll find if I'm stressed out that I'm not breathing fully, so I'm breathing in a more shallow manner. I'll find that, I'm starting to feel knots in my shoulders, so to speak. I'll find that I'm starting to get impatient with other people. And in my work, I have a lot of autonomy, so that would be a time when I would shift tasks and I would focus on something where I can, in my case, I'm not ashamed to take my implants out and just relax for a while and focus on something that I need to read or write where communication isn't important right at that moment. So that's what I mean about managing my energy and managing stress. So another example would be in terms of managing isolation. So I know I can't go to happy hour with my coworkers. I mean, I can, but it's definitely very stressful and tiring for me. So I tend to just invite my colleagues to go out for lunch, pick a quiet place, or even have lunch in the office for people that are more difficult to communicate with. And that's another way of kind of managing my integration within my work group, being proactive about it, but also doing it in a way that isn't so stressful and tiring for me. So I think the first step is just becoming aware of your level of fatigue and stress in the workplace and trying to figure out, what it is that stresses you out so much, the type of work, the people you're talking with, and then seeing if there are ways that you can, do less of that work or do it differently. And I know that's not always possible. And that gets into where people start to sometimes look for different work or different careers. So hopefully that helps a little bit.
Good advice. Carrie is or was a nurse practitioner for 15 years, and she said, can you make suggestions for the person who has had a lengthy career and are returning to the workforce after a long leave with a new hearing loss? I'm trying to decide if I can go back to my former medical profession and how to present myself with my new identity and also prove that I'm still competent.
Yeah. And I've talked with a lot of medical professionals, so I think it depends on what you're doing. So there are cases where people really can't safely continue the exact same type of work. And the more you have invested in your career, the more disruptive it is to try to do something different. So all the things I'm describing, I don't mean to make any of them sound easy, because they're not, and that was clear in the people that we interviewed. They found success, but there were a lot of ups and downs, a lot of pain along the way. But particularly with the medical providers, the people that found more success later on were able to specialize in things that didn't require as much communication and were able to refocus on patients that had hearing loss, so that their hearing loss could be an asset, for that patient as well as for their coworkers. So those are the successful strategies that I've seen. There are also people that really give up their practice and go into a whole new profession. So it depends on the nature of your hearing loss, and it depends on the specifics for your work. But that's what I've seen people in the medical field do. Some very successfully, and others, move on to different things.
Maria said, I am hard of hearing. My biggest struggle are the telephones in my office. So to me, that is very stressful. I always find myself taking my hearing aid off because I can't hear.
Yeah, I haven't worn a hearing aid in a long time, so I don't have any direct experience there, but I've observed other people do the same. So for the phone, different strategies that people use. One is using captioning. So there are great services for caption calls that include, being able to use your own voice. The other person speaks back. But a captioner or a computer these days is writing down everything the other person said, just like we have the captioning tonight. So that is one strategy. It doesn't work for all people in all work situations. Another strategy is amplification. Bluetooth technology, linking phones straight to hearing aids or cochlear implants work for other people. For me personally, I hear best if I use a high-quality headset with my cell phone. So I plug a headset into the phone jack and use headphones with noise cancellation, and it allows both ears to be engaged. And here's the sneaky part. It also, I think, makes it a little harder for the other person to hear me, which makes them more conscious of being careful in their own speech. So hopefully that's not a bad strategy for me. But if the other person is struggling a little bit, then I find that they're more careful about communicating with me. And I also make sure that I tell people, so for me the biggest issue on the phone is people just speak too quickly. And so I tell them, gosh, if you want to tell me once, you need to slow down a little bit. Sometimes I tell them, take me off your speaker phone and pick up the handset so you can speak to me more directly. So again, hopefully one of those strategies works for you. People experiment with a lot of different things to find something that works well for them in the workplace.
There was a question about whether you can ask your employer to pay for technology that you might use on the job. And I hope Jill saw the answer I posted there, that absolutely you can ask for accommodations under the ADA. And we do have a lot of information about that on our website. So I hope you take advantage of that. And if you cannot find it, please email me and I will put my email address here. But we do have a ton of resources on our website, including that employment toolkit.
Okay, yeah, that's great. I've purposely stayed away from some of the legal aspects today because it's beyond our basic rights. It's a challenge to implement them on a day-to-day basis at work. And some things, like hearing aids, employers are not necessarily expected to provide. Other things like a amplified telephone, employers are definitely expected to provide. And then there are things like remote microphones that are, more in the gray area, so to speak. But the ADA does give you the right to reasonable accommodation, and reasonable is defined in light of the organization's overall resources. So it covers a lot. So thank you for that question and also for that response.
Right. I apologize, Jill, if you were not the one answering or asking that question. But in any event, there's another question I think that might take you all day to answer. But that is, what are good careers for hard of hearing individuals? Kind of a broad question.
Yeah, I mean, so, one response would be that you need to see yourself both as a person that has hearing loss, but also, just as a person, right? So, and I talk about this a lot in the article that I made reference to at the beginning. So you want to spend your time doing things that you're good at and that you enjoy. That will give you a lot of energy and make you valuable to other people. Some of those things are going to, kind of allow you to swim with the current in terms of your hearing loss, and other things you're going to be swimming upstream, so to speak. So, for example, for most people, jobs that require you to be on the phone, all day, every day, is going to be more stressful and more fatiguing. If it's what you love to do and it's what you're good at, then perhaps you should pursue that. But in general, the trends that I've found are people that find a more technical focus For example, accounting, I've interviewed a lot of happy and satisfied accountants because their work requires a lot of education and skill, but often can be done without a lot of ongoing everyday communication with other people. So there are breaks in their need to communicate with other people. It could be engineering, it could be computer programming, so I meet a lot of web designers because again it has more of a technical focus. And if you're working via the internet all day and not the phone, other people may have no idea that you even have a hearing impairment. So it creates a whole new frontier for people with hearing loss to work.
Good information. Unfortunately, we are out of time tonight. So I thank you very much, Dr. Baldridge, for presenting tonight, and thank you everybody for attending. Look for an article from Dr. Baldridge in Hearing Loss Magazine coming up soon, and we hope to see you in Salt Lake City as well. If you like tonight's webinar and you want more information about HLAA, please see our website at hearingloss.org. Again, thanks so much for attending tonight. I'll see you next month. Thanks again, Dr. Baldridge.
So good night, everyone.